So let's talk decisions. How do you do with making a choice? Let's say, for example, you're at the eye doctor. A little better one, a little better two. A little better one, a little better two. Are you able to say, hey, it's one, it's definitive, you've answered it, and then you can move on to the next is a little better? Or are you like, oh, let me see two again? What was one? How do you do with choices? Uh, in your house with your significant other, hey, let's go out to dinner. And then what ensues from that is either this is where I want to go, we're going to go here, this is the thing I'm in the mood for, or a prolonged discussion of where you don't want to go. What kind of person are you? How well do you do with making choices? Hey, let's watch something together tonight. You're ready to watch it, and then you spend the next half an hour going down through every possible show and every possible streaming service to try to decide. You either know or you have to think about it for a long time. What kind of decision maker are you? I don't know if you've heard about this, but there is this thing called the paradox of choice. And the paradox of choice is that the more options we have, the less satisfied we are. The more options there are, the less satisfied we are. Because we're able to say, hey, we could have, we chose Mexican tonight, but we could have had all these other restaurants. And so your satisfaction goes down with the more options you have. And that's a paradox of choice. And we can become almost, paralyzed in the face of choice. Are you a good decision maker, or do you feel this weight of choice and it's hard for you to do it? I don't know where you sit with all of that, but I'm going to try to make this as simple as I can. I'll give you two choices. I'll try to make this simple, straightforward, even though two options can be complicated enough, I guess. Do you believe that God is holy and above us and tests us and makes requirements of us? Or do you believe that God is with us and has entered into our world and is in relationship with us? How do you do with choices? Are you a person that's good with choices, or do you sort of get stuck in them? And I'm going to give you a choice between two things: a holy, other, powerful God, or a present, loving, engaged God. Which of those do you choose? Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to Preparing for Sunday, where you and I take a look together at the upcoming Sunday's scripture lectionary text. This is for the 15th Sunday after Pentecost, year B. We are now into Mark. Year B is the Mark year, and so we have now pivoted from that a few weeks ago, excursus into John, and we're back into a prolonged time now of readings from Mark that'll work pretty sequentially. And this week's Mark reading is from the 7th chapter. It's Mark chapter 7, verses 24 through 37. And in a minute, I'm going to get to wading into choices and who God makes us and what that means for how we make choices. Because this is preparing for Sunday, I'll interject here, because this is good as anywhere, that this upcoming Sunday, September 8th of 2024, will be observed here at St. Stephen as God's Work Our Hands Sunday, which means we will be putting together some Lutheran World Relief kits. It will sort of change the format for worship for us, including how much time we spend on this gospel. I would say that the choice is being made for you. We're going to kind of try to live into who God makes us, and less, a sort of traditional service, and much more a time of fellowship and service together. So we will visit the text briefly Sunday. You're going to get a way more in-depth visit of it here, okay? So this is for September 8th, 2024. This will be God's Work Our Hands Sunday, and this will be sort of the longest offering I'll have this week to look into the 7th chapter of Mark, verses 24 through 37. And what I think is happening here, and what I think is being emphasized here, is choosing between a righteous, powerful, other, nearly inscrutable God, or a personal, loving, relational, understanding, present God. And for the next few minutes, I'll kind of try to explain why I'm making it about that choice, all right? So over the course of year B, we have had many readings from Mark, and we've had some from John inserted. When the verses from John get inserted, I talk about those differently than I talk about the way Mark talks or teaches. I say of John that it's from above, and I say of Mark that it's more from below. And that's getting into this choice that we have. From above would be this righteous, other, holy God who has all these rules or challenges or tests or things for us to accomplish in order to become holy. God communicates, but the communicated things are rules that if we need to follow really well in order to be more like God and therefore live better. And John gives us this sort of top-down sort of idea of Jesus and of God. What I mean by that is that in John, Jesus has a clear mission of the cross. He's constantly saying, my hour has not come, my hour will soon come, and I will be raised up. My glorification will be this cross. He's on a deliberate mission to get to the cross, and that's this God from somewhere else showing us the path, how it's done. He gives us elaborate, lengthy teachings, Jesus does in John, and they're complicated, and they're expecting us to hear them and then be sort of moved to another plane. There's little regard in John for Jesus' humanity. He does have some. I mean, it says Jesus wept in John, but that's the shortest verse there in John. It's few and far between. Often what we get is this Jesus who knows a lot about how God is at work. He's come from heaven, he's come into our midst, and he's on this mission in our midst to show us, to elevate us to righteousness, to holiness, and to what that would look like. Mark gives us this other sort of sense of who John is, or who Jesus is, and it's more this sort of human Jesus, which I'm going to talk about here in the coming minutes. That comes out for me in particular, this dichotomy, this choice, this potential choice. This comes out for me in particular in this week's reading, where Jesus addresses a woman who comes to him. The Bible calls her, in the footnote or in the heading here, a Syrophoenician woman who comes to Jesus asking for her daughter to be healed. This is in the 24th and then the verse of Mark chapter 7, and it goes through the 30th verse. And Jesus looks at her and says, why should I heal your daughter? Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. And then she says, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. And this historically is interpreted as Jesus testing this woman. Jesus is from above, and the way it's often told when we see these verses, that it's just a test. That God tests us in order for our righteousness to be perfected and to be elevated into where God is from. I'm going to contend with you here that this is Mark, and that the context of Mark means that there's something else going on here besides a test. This is, to me, not Jesus saying, hey, I know everything, and so I'm just going to test you, and that therefore your righteousness gets lined up, and the higher your righteousness is, the more elevated you become. That's a John sort of thing, and maybe that's the kind of God you're looking for, but that's not what we're getting here in Mark. First of all, in no place does it say Jesus is testing this woman. Like, for example, Job in the Old Testament is tested by God. That book clearly says that there's a dialogue going on, that it's a test that God is setting before Job. and then it's the whole process of him taking that test. There is no claim of that here. So that starts to make you say, well, is that really the way to interpret this? Also, it's really paints God as this sort of cruel God here. If he's going to call her essentially a dog as a test, hey, I didn't really mean it. I was just calling you that to see how you would react, to see if you were righteous or faithful. Again, that to me is not the choice I'm going to make with this text, or what that seems to be about. Mark is from below. I say that a lot. It talks a lot about Jesus' humanity and Jesus' common connection to you and I. If God is wholly other and can test us and give us rules, that's sort of maybe more a John description of Jesus. Here we get this Jesus that is different in Mark. And I'll explain some reasons why I constantly say that. Son of Man. Jesus says, I am the Son of Man. So see, that is already kind of talking about a connection to humanity, whereas in the other Gospels, where he earmarks himself, I have come to bring the kingdom. That's a different type of descriptor. Son of Man is sort of emphasizing his connection or similarity as opposed to his transcendence, and that's a Mark thing. In Mark, we also get a lot of Jesus' emotions. If in John we get Jesus wept at Lazarus' death, that's really the only sense of that we get. Whereas in Mark, there are all sorts of emotional things with Jesus that you don't see in the other Gospels. These are found only in Mark. His compassion, he's severe with people in a way that he's not in others. That can be a sign of what's happening here in Mark, where he's a little bit more severe with this woman than he is in other Gospels. He has anger come across in Mark more often. He's sorrowful more often in Mark. He's tender and loving. He just runs this gamut of emotions in Mark in a way that he doesn't in the other Gospels. I'll give you some references to look that up, and these are mostly found only in Mark. Mark 1:41, Mark 1:43, Mark 3:15, Mark 8:12, Mark 8:33, Mark 10, verse 14, verse 16, verse 21. Those are some examples. If you want to say, well, why is he all the time saying that? Those are some examples of Jesus' emotions that appear in Mark in a way that's not in Luke and Matthew, and certainly not in John. Also, at one point in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is asked, who will sit on his right and who on his left, and he says to them, it's not up to me to know the will of God. He just lacks the transcendent ability to. He doesn't say, hey, I'm not going to tell you that right now, or hey, I'm keeping that to myself and you should think about other things. He says, I don't really know. And so there's a lack of transcendence there. He does not want to boast about his abilities. That's a sense we get here in Mark 7. It says he entered a house and did not want anyone to know he's there. That's different than John, where he's performing signs and very clearly teaching. In Mark, he's often defaulting into, boy, I hope no one notices me. I hope no one sees this. He doesn't boast about who he is. I think he knows in Mark that who he is, that he's God's son. I think that's clear, but it's more human in that he's more interested in sitting with people in this house than he is being transcendent and then saying, but well, now you better do all this stuff to get to me. He's subtle here. There is that time here where he will ride the donkey, and so his sort of whole presence in Mark is this humble one that rides this donkey. It's not this magnificent animal, it's just a sort of earthy, normal thing. And so I can go on and on about that, but that's a lot of the way Mark paints Jesus. And what we're asked to think about is whether God is transcendent, outside of us and righteous, or whether God is present. And we're sort of to the point of this preparing where we're jumping from talking about the scripts or the text or the scripture text that's for the week, I'll jump a little bit more into talking to you. Why does it matter which of these that we hear or see? Well, if God is transcendent and is a God of rules and holiness, then you tend to treat yourself and others like this. I need to do better to get to God. I need to follow all these rules to get to this transcendent God. Other people need to not dance or not sing or not do this bad stuff in order for them to ever get to God. It's a way to communicate who we are, who God makes us, and how we think God is at work. That's why this choice matters. If God is present and loving, and if God in this text is not testing, but is himself in relationship and experiencing a new thing presented to him by a person that's different to him and requires his adaptation, his relating, then we get a different picture of God. A God that never abandons us, that is with us, and that as each day goes and a question comes up, and whether we're good at answering that question or not. Should I switch jobs? Should I retire? Should I go help out my neighbor? Should I take this medicine or see that doctor? When these choices come up, we see God as with us. We see God as going through it with us, walking through it, adapting, sort of learning as we're learning. And those are two different perspectives. Instead of saying, hey, you have to do this because the Bible tells you you have to do this, God's righteous, you always do choice A, you have to do that. When you get this Markan feel, you get the feel of Jesus in this text, who's approached by a woman, that he, she's Syrophoenician, she's different from him, he's in an area he hasn't been in. She presents an issue that he hadn't been encountered by, and he's moved enough to sort of say, hey, you know what, I am going to move from what I thought I was going to do into something new together with you. That is certainly two different ways to see and to believe what faith is. I would say as Lutherans, we tend much more to this Markan explanation of who God is, and that's, doesn't mean you're wrong if you pick the other one. It just begins to unfold how you exist, how you live the day that God has given you. I should be doing better. I want to do A, B, and C. This person better be doing. Or as a thing comes to you, you're going to be prayerful and you're just going to make the best decision you can, knowing God is with you and knowing God works with whatever God's given. These are two separate sort of things that is sort of a false dichotomy that I'm kind of working on here. I think in reality, God is both of these things, fully other and fully present, and that sometimes it's rules and things we ought to do, and sometimes it's all learning and relating and adapting and being loved through things. I think it's really both of those things. But the idea of is God other or is God present, and does God adapt or does God make us adapt? The reason why I'm laying that out there is because my sense would be a lot of the faith we see in the world around us is faith that is an ought on ourselves, that weighs on ourselves, and that we use almost as a weapon or a tool on other people. You ought to be doing this because you're not right. And I think we take God's job. God is the other one with the rules and that asks us to be righteous, as John would point out. Notice that we have both of those stories. We don't just have Mark or just John, we have both. But I think the moment-to-moment process is a God with us, that there are oughts and there are things that drive us, but that God goes through those, and that sometimes God's own mission or direction can alter depending on the amount of chaos or need that arises. I think that's important for us to think about, because what we're proclaiming when we gather in worship or around Jesus is that I cannot control things. I cannot do everything that's needed to be good or holy. So I rely on my baptism, on the idea that God loves me, that it's God's embrace that gives me my identity. And I think what that really is a way of making decisions. If Jesus loves you, if Jesus embraces you in the waters of your baptism, Jesus knows who you are, knows the issues that come up for you, like the issue that comes up for both characters in today's gospel, the Syrophoenician woman and the blind man. God knows what comes up for us, and God gives us an identity, a presence, a healing in those things, and then asks us to exist based on who God has made us. We don't exist like God's out there somewhere, and if we can just make 50 good choices in a row, we'll get to him. We exist like God has already done everything we need. God has embraced us and freed us to exist. And some of our choices are not going to be the right ones, but we see these novel, like this person who's different from us, who comes up to us, and we see this willingness to say, you know, I need to think this through. I'm willing to be wrong. I'm willing to not just look at you every time and say, you better be doing this, but to know that relationships are this growing, always going somewhere work of God. So that's, really the thing that impressed me here with the text. To me, that's a good connection to God's work, our hands. It's a healing story. And so what we're thinking about is that Jesus comes from somewhere else, and it's a holy Jesus with commandments and expectations for how we should live that we never know how to apply perfectly. So we need one another, and we embrace our fellowship and our love, and mostly we embrace that God has made us God's children. And then we know that frees us to do the best we can with the time we have. And so this Sunday we will make Lutheran World Relief care kits, kits that are sent to people in places that may not have access to some of the items we'll send that have to do with hygiene and care, and then health. We're not doing that because, hey, when we do this, we're good people. We're doing this because God has made us God's hands, and we get to do it. And that seems like I'm splitting hairs, and I kind of am. But what we're thinking about here is whether life is a long series of oughts and expectations, or whether it's a being embraced by God. I would say it starts with a being embraced with God, and then a growth into what God's hope for our existence would be. There are rules, there are expectations. I think they start to come on after we are reminded again and again who we are. The expectation for this Sunday would be that we make these kits and we participate in them because we believe Jesus heals. And we're not saying, hey, we're doing this because we're saving ourselves. We're doing this because we believe the gospel is about interrelationships. It's about thinking about people that are different from us. It's really about, to me, it's really about being changed through relationships and experience, as opposed to always believing there's only one answer and everybody else better look like this. This is a time to think about not the theology or philosophy of faith, but of what it would be like to just sit in and be who God says we are. So I've run there through all sorts of things, thinking primarily about the 7th chapter of Mark, and really the way Mark functions in the Bible as a whole. And what I'm talking about here is who we are and how we make decisions. And long story short, I'm good at making decisions. I'll make a decision right now and tell you who I'm saying we are. Who I'm saying we are is that we are broken, often mistaken people who ourselves struggle with the difficulty of all the things we go through, but who cling to an identity as God's embraced, as God's children in our baptism. And because of that, we're willing to go and do things that may ask us to grow, or do things that are out of our routine, like leave church a little early and put Lutheran World Relief kits together. Instead of saying everything better look like this, we understand that God is a God of hand-holding and constant reminding of our baptism, constant identity giving, and constant opportunity providing. This is an opportunity to live and to exist. It's something different than just looking out at the world and telling everybody how they ought to look. It's this humility of Jesus that we find in this text. It's the humility of both people who need healed and are willing to set themselves before God for healing. And that's really the direction of this week's text. It asks us to see ourselves as broken people who God refuses to abandon, but instead gives us an identity of who we are in our baptism. We are claimed, we are children of God, and so now we get to exist in a way that is relating and is together with other people, and that enjoys our days as they're given to us by God. All right, so again, the text for this Sunday, which is September 8th, is Mark 7, and more importantly, I guess, for us this Sunday, this is God's Work, Our Hands Sunday, where we will not talk about the theory of being healed as much as sit down and enter into a project that we hope God will use to remind us of what healing looks like. All right, I hope you're able to join us Sunday. Stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you soon.